Good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to be here with you today. I'm Allison Schaberg, and I have my partner here, Michelle Morris. We are with Consolidated Planning Group. Consolidated Planning Group is a holistic special needs financial planning firm. We do webinars on a pretty regular basis, podcasts as well, on topics surrounding planning for special needs. We are nationally certified as Social Security advisors, members of the Special Needs Planning Academy. And a lot of these podcasts and webinars were born, honestly, out of my own frustration. I'm a mother to four. I have two kids with disabilities and have kind of transitioned into adulthood. And really, I eat, sleep, and breathe this personally and professionally. And what I found is that I found the whole process really unnecessarily difficult, and I found it very frustrating, even knowing what I know. So that's kind of how these educational meetings have come about, because we want to equip you as a parent with the tools and resources that you need to be successful on your journey when it comes to planning for your loved one with a disability. So a few housekeeping items for today. You guys are in webinar mode today. Some people might be joining from a podcast, but so we can't see you or hear you, but we do know you're out there, and we are glad that you're here. So if you're joining from the webinar today, if you have questions, go ahead and put your questions in the chat box today. Michelle is going to be monitoring the chat box, and we aim to answer as many questions as we can. If we can't answer them on this forum, or if you're in a different forum and you've got additional questions, you will be able to reach out to us directly at 281-690-1177. Michelle will be sharing our contact information periodically through the Zoom in the chat box as well. And then our email address is contact@cpgcares.net. It is on the screen. So if you're joining by podcast, you can email us for a copy of today's slides if you want them to go along with the recording. So today, the topic that we are talking about are the key steps to achieving financial success. When we have a loved one with a disability, when it comes to planning, our planning looks a little bit different, especially if our loved one has care needs for the rest of their life, not just the rest of ours. We want to talk about how you really get started with the special needs planning process. We're going to talk about a lot of topics today, and we do have a YouTube channel that is going to be in the chat box as well. All of our past webinars, podcasts live on our YouTube channel, so there's over 250 topics out there, so you can peruse them for the step that you're on in your planning process, and kind of, if you want to get, really, personal on a specific topic that you need help with. So we invite you to find that YouTube channel, and you can always subscribe to that for free. Okay, so no cost for our webinars, podcast, or the YouTube channel, so you can get the help that you need out there. So first things first, we want to talk about a letter of intent. This is something that some people have heard of, and a lot of people have never heard of a letter of intent. We hear about wills and trust and special needs trust and things like that. But a letter of intent is really, I always liken it to a family love letter. If we were writing a love letter to our family about our loved one with a disability, and this is basically saying, hey, I'm the caregiver of said individual, and if something happens to me and somebody else is stepping in my shoes, I need you to know this about my child. We have created a template for a letter of intent. It's actually 20 pages long, which sounds pretty intense there. It's a 20-page form fillable PDF. And in fact, we'll be happy to include that when we send out the slides today. We're going to send out a copy of the slides, a copy of the recording, and we'll be happy to send out that template of the letter of intent. This is everything about your child. What are their diagnoses? What meds do they take? Who are their doctors? Names, address, phone numbers. What are your religious preferences? What schools have they attended? What churches or any kind of any kind of thing like that have they been to? What does somebody need to know? What makes your child thrive and do really well? What makes them melt down or fall apart? These are things that, as a caregiver, sometimes even in our own home, like the other parent. So sometimes in a home, we've got one parent that is a caregiver, and one parent that works outside the home, and see, sometimes even in our own home, the other person in the house doesn't know all of the things that the caregiver does. I always say that usually the caregiver has forgot more than anybody will ever know. And so getting this on paper and really letting your loved ones know, where is this document? Or if you feel inclined to share it with them before something happens, you can certainly do that. Otherwise, you can let them know where to find it in the event that something happens. It's really, really important to do this. This can be an emotional document because it's kind of highlighting the trajectory of life that you guys have gone through so far. And sometimes it's been bumpy, sometimes it's been great, sometimes it's been bumpy. So it can be emotional when you're doing this. So I say, if you don't have a letter of intent, give yourself some grace, give yourself some time, maybe a timeline, a month, 2 months, 3 months to get it done. I don't necessarily recommend doing it all in one sitting. I also recommend that you update this, and maybe twice a year, whatever it is. Maybe it's, maybe you have a reminder to change the batteries in your smoke alarms in your house or something along those lines. Just keep this on a reminder to update this. Some families have a loved one that's condition changes rapidly and quickly, and so you're going to want to update yours more often. And other families, the diagnosis is about the same, it stays about the same, and there's not a lot of changes. So we want to update that as frequent as possible. So another thing we want to talk about is, first I want to distinguish between what do we do and what does a special needs planning attorney do? What are the differences? And so we are special needs planners, again, nationally certified as Social Security advisors, members of the Special Needs Planning Academy. Our whole practice is nuanced in working with families who have a loved one with a disability. But a lot of times people call us and they'll say, I need guardianship, or I need a special needs trust, or I need you to help me get a will, or things like that. And so that is not what we do. So I kind of shorten this by saying, when it comes to a special needs attorney, they're the paper, we're the money. When it comes to funding future care for our loved one with a disability, we have to plan carefully financially. Because number one, we want to make sure that there's enough money to fund that special needs trust, and we want to get the right amount into that special needs trust. But number two, it is critically important that we have money in the right buckets to preserve eligibility for benefits in the future, and we're going to talk more about that. So, just as though if you had a heart attack, you're not going to go see a podiatrist to talk about your heart issues. You're not going to go to your PCP if you have heart issues. You're going to go see a cardiologist. And what we say here is your situation is specialized. There is special circumstances, and you do want to work with a specialist when it comes to planning for your loved ones. We've got big buckets that we need here. So when we have a loved one with a disability, if you're married, it's, 2 retirements, there's 2 buckets right there, and we could be spending 25 to 35 years in retirement. But if we have a loved one with a disability that has care needs for the rest of their life, that's like a 3rd retirement bucket, because they may have care needs 25 to 35 years beyond our own life. So that's why it's so critically important to do careful planning. You do not have to be a millionaire to get started. That there is no truth in that at all. It's always nice if you have millions of dollars to fund your special needs trust. But I think that the key thing is getting started, building on the foundation that you have already started, and taking intentional steps as you move forward in your planning. And that's going to help you reach your goals in the long term. And we always really talk about that this is really a marathon, not a sprint, okay? So we want you to think about your vision of how you hope things will look for both you and your loved one. Most parents, we don't have to be told to look out for our loved ones. We're always looking out for them to a fault, putting our own needs on the back burner and things like that. But there really needs to be a fine balance with this, because oftentimes our vision of retirement is much different than someone that has only neurotypical kids that are going to graduate high school, go to college, get out of college, and get out of the house, right? It looks very, very different. So having some balance in that and kind of planning some balance in there for our own health is really, really important. So bounce it back to the estate planning attorney. We really, really strongly recommend that you work with a specialized estate planning attorney. We do have referrals, and we make, qualified referrals to attorneys all across the state, not just in this area, that are nuanced specifically in special needs. Your legal documents are not a DIY project. And even if you are an attorney, we have plenty of attorneys that we actually refer to estate planning attorneys. So your neighbor next door that's the real estate attorney, or your brother that is the corporate attorney, they're really not well versed in special needs. So we want to be careful on that. Okay. So if you need a referral, we're happy to make those. And then we really want you to gather all of those planning documents together. So what we're looking at on the planning documents, the things that we're thinking about is, number one, do you already have a will or a trust in place? We're looking at Social Security statements, 401ks, 403bs, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, any insurance, life insurance, disability, health insurance that you have either with your employer, like your group employment, or you have outside of your employer. All of these things are kind of the things that come, overall to your overall plan in planning for the future. Okay, so we kind of hit on this. I'm going to move forward. You guys are going to get a copy of today's slides, but this is the letter of intent and some additional bullet points of really what goes into that letter of intent. And as I mentioned earlier, we are going to be happy to provide you guys the PDF form fillable of our letter of intent, so you guys can get going on creating your own letter of intent. So a few of the things on here is the family information, educational history, employment history, any legal guardians, any of the legal documents that we kind of mentioned as well. And so you'll see all of that. And again, it'll be form fillable, and you can take your time in reviewing that. So I did see in the chat box where we had somebody, if they did not register, could they still attend? I think if they click the link, it will take them to register, and they absolutely can join late. So there's no problem with that at all. Okay. So here, we're going to talk about how do we fund future care? Because I think when we think about what causes us to lose sleep at night when we have a loved one with a disability, and it's that funding. It's what happens when I'm gone. How are we going to fund the care? How, what do we need, and what goes into funding? And then, as parents, we hear in circles that don't do this or don't do that, and this is going to cause problems if you do that. And that is true when it comes to planning for our loved ones. So first things first, we really want to preserve eligibility for state and federally funded programs. SSI stands for Supplemental Security Income. It's under Title 16. And then there is something called SSDI under Title II, okay? So first things first, we're going to talk about SSI. This is the SSI program under Title 16 is for the indigent and the disabled, okay? So right now, the amount for SSI is $914 per month. This just got a cost of living adjustment upgrade, a big one. I think was 8% something for 2023. So we just went up from $841 per month to $914 per month. A lot of times, there's a lot of confusion about SSI and SSDI, because we think my child has a disability, they should qualify for SSDI. And there's a lot of confusion under that. And SSI is an entitlement program, okay? You don't pay into SSI. Social Security or SSDI is a program where we pay into it. As we work, we earn work quarters under our record. And so a lot of our kids haven't paid into the SSDI system, okay? So it is typically SSI that they're going to qualify for first, unless a parent has retired or become disabled prior to that time. Oftentimes, our children do not qualify for SSI prior to them turning age 18. It's not always, okay? It's not 100% of the time, but oftentimes our kids don't qualify for SSI prior to turning 18 because the income, because they're looking at assets and income when it comes to the qualification. It is a means-based test. They're looking at your financial assets. If your child is under age 18, they are looking at the parent's assets and income, not the child, okay? So some of you may have applied and got denied and you didn't understand why, because your child is clearly disabled, and it is simply because they were counting your assets and income. So what's important for you to know here is that when your child turns 18, what they're counting is still the same amount, but who they're counting it for changes. So once your child turns 18, they're going to count their assets and income, not yours. Even if you have guardianship, even if your child still lives under your roof, they are going to count your the child's assets and income once they turn 18. So the main thing that you need to know, you've probably heard this before, but just in case, I want to mention it. We always want to stay Medicaid qualified. And in order to stay Medicaid qualified, you have to have less than $2,000 in your name, okay? Less than $2,000 in the child's name if they are over 18. So if you have any more than $2,000 in the child's name, it needs to be in the confines of a special needs trust or an ABLE account. So a special needs trust and an ABLE account are two different places that you can have money above and beyond the $2,000 that they count that will not be counted against you. So money in a third-party special needs trust or a first-party special needs trust or money in an ABLE account will not be counted against them for that means-based test. So that's a very, very important thing to know. And all trusts are not created equally. It is specifically a special needs trust, first party or third party, that it must be for it not to be counted against them, okay? So you want to be thinking about creating a special needs trust for their future care. A special needs trust is going to provide for their future care and pay for things for their benefit while maintaining their eligibility for any state and federally funded programs. It is also important to note that for Medicaid, all of the waivers in the state of Texas, and we're going to talk more about this on this webinar, require a Medicaid eligibility for the waivers in the state of Texas. So if you're interested in a waiver in the future, like HCS, you've heard some of these before, HCS, Texas Home Living, CLASS, Community First Choice, or to name a few, you do want to maintain that eligibility for Medicaid. So Social Security and Social Security Disability, also known as SSDI, and then sometimes it's known as Retirement Survivors Disability Income. So it could be, they could throw that acronym around of RSDI. This is where we're paying into that system. But when it comes to SSI and SSDI, as parents, it's important for us to establish that the child's disability started prior to age 22, because there are some additional benefits that your child will be eligible when a parent turns on their Social Security or becomes disabled through the Social Security Administration. So we'll talk more about that. So another way that we fund care is through your current life insurance and assets. A lot of times people want to know, well, how much do I need to fund the trust? And we help with that on the future care cost estimates that are completely tailored to your family and your desires and your wishes for your child. But oftentimes, life insurance on the parent's life that has the beneficiary as the special needs trust is one big way that people do fund their special needs trust. They leave their assets, such as retirement assets, 401ks, things of that nature, available for their own use for the 25 to 35 years that they might spend in retirement. And then any extras may fund the trust, and then additional life insurance may also fund the trust. Okay. So, when should you apply and what do you need to apply for? Okay. So, in 2022, the Social Security Administration launched an online tool for applying for SSI. Some of you may have heard that dealing with the Social Security Administration is difficult at best. Long hold times, struggling to get through, no response when you're sending documents and things like that. So as of late, I do recommend that people use the online tool when you are applying for SSI. And the reason I recommend that is because when you use the online tool, it's saving the date. So even though that when you apply for SSI, it literally could take 3 to 6 months for it to be approved, they're going to backdate that check back to that date that you locked in on your online application. It literally takes about 5 minutes to do the online application to state your intentions to apply for SSI, and it will let you know that you will receive a phone call to schedule your appointment to actually go through the application. Okay, so we suggest applying for SSI the month of your child's 18th birthday. If you're going to schedule an appointment and you're going to go in person, you want to go to the office, we suggest calling a few months ahead of the birthday to schedule your date, and you want to do it at least one day after their 18th birthday. If you schedule it before their 18th birthday and you go in there, they are going to take all of the parents' financial information and your child's going to get denied. And then you're going to have to go through the process all over again. So it is frustrating. Some people do like to go in person. Some people don't like the online platform. So you do have some choices on that. You want to have evidence that demonstrates that your child's disability began prior to age 22, if it in fact did, to qualify for childhood disability benefits, which they also throw the acronym around of CDB, which stands for the Childhood Disability Benefits. For 40 years, they referred to childhood disability benefits as disabled adult child. So if you ever are talking to somebody at the Social Security Administration and they say DAC, DAC, or disabled adult child, they're referring to childhood disability benefits, which is now called CDB. It's the exact same thing, but sometimes this causes confusion for people. So I just wanted to mention that. We want you, as you're preparing, because a lot of times people feel overwhelmed. They've heard bad stories of people getting denied or things like that. And so the idea of applying for this feels hard, and we want to put that off. So I want to talk to you about how you can get prepared for your application and what I did, okay? So first, what I recommend is just creating a folder on your computer, okay? Just label it SSI. And then as you're preparing for your application, you can prepare your Word documents and just slide them in your folder, and then you're going to have everything you need. I suggest gathering medical history. And what we're talking about here, you want to have the physician's name, address, and phone number. What do I mean by physicians? I'm talking about your primary care physician, any specialist that your child sees. It could be neurology, cardiology, oncology, whatever the specialists are. You're going to want to have the name and address and phone numbers for all of them. You also are going to want to have any psychologist or psychiatrist. If your child sees a licensed clinical social worker for counseling or something, they don't care about that. They don't want their records. But so a medical doctor, MD, is what they're looking for. So psychologist or psychiatrist also matters. So you want to get the diagnosis history. What are the names of the diagnoses? And don't forget anything. So if your child's primary diagnosis is autism, but they also have ADHD, anxiety, depression, or any other comorbid conditions, you want to make sure that you're listing all of the things that they have, because it could be any number of the diagnoses that end up, getting that approval. Okay. So what are the names of the diagnoses? When were they diagnosed? They want to know about medications. They want to know the name of the medications. They do not care about the dosage or the milligrams, but they want to know the names of the medications, and they would also like to know what those medications are specifically for, okay? We want the last 3 months of the child's bank statements, if there is bank statements for the child. If the child has been working, they want employment records, names, address, and phone numbers of who the employer is or was. And they also want 3 months of pay stubs, if any, if the child is working. So I will start by saying that what I'm about to tell you is a little bit extra, but I would say that it helped us get approved the first time as opposed to going round and round with the Social Security Administration. Know that they're going to seek out the medical records of your child. So I would say consider chatting with your primary care physician or whatever doctors that you're going to have them get the records for. And just say, listen, I'm getting ready to apply for SSI for my child. They're going to send for his medical records, his or her medical records. And I just want to take a peek at what's in there to make sure everything is there. Because sometimes people's applications for SSI are denied simply because the medical records were wrong. Or sometimes it's because the doctor didn't send the medical records. They get a letter requesting the records and they have a timeline that they have to respond by. So I did this on the front end, and there were actually some corrections that needed to be made in my child's record, and we got those corrections done. And so it was approved on the first time. So I'm going to take a pause for a moment. Michelle, do we have some questions?
We do. When you're talking about sending in the last 3 months of bank statements, you're talking about the child's account, right?
Yes.
And is it if the child has no bank account at all?
So it's okay if the child doesn't have a bank account at all. You are going to have a bank account for where the money is going to be deposited to, because they do direct deposit. So sometimes I recommend you setting up a separate bank account. So if your child does not have capacity to manage their own funds, like you're going to apply to be their representative payee with the Social Security Administration, I would open up a separate account specifically earmarked for their SSI. And the reason I would do this is because periodically when your child is approved for benefits, they're going to do a financial check. And if you have this, you can have it tied to your own account, but it's a mess. And then they want your bank records. It's just a mess. It's so much cleaner if you have a standalone account. So maybe it's a savings account that can have a direct deposit. It could be a checking account. It could be like a parent-run checking account. And some parents have an account where both the parent and the child's name is on the account, and that is all okay. And so for your first question, Michelle, so we are talking about the child's information, the child's financial assets if they are over 18. Most people are not going to qualify prior to the child turning 18, because if the child is under 18, it's based off of the parent's assets and income. So bottom line is, if you have more than $2,000 in your name, if your child's a minor, if you have more than one house and more than one car, your child is basically not going to qualify, and you're kind of wasting your time applying, okay? So that's kind of how that works for under age 18. Okay, what else do we have, Michelle?
Well, when we're talking about medical history, a lot has occurred since birth with these kids, and they've been on a lot of different medications. Should we write down every doctor and every medication, or just the current ones, or how does that look?
They're really looking for the most current doctors, where the most current records are and the current medications they're talking about. They don't really care what the kid was taking 5 years ago or something along those lines, unless there was some kind of medication that the child was taking 5 years ago, and as a result of that medication, XYZ happened, like disability-wise, then they might care about that. But they are looking for the most current information for sure.
And then those medical records, do they have to come from the treating doctors, or can I send something in?
So you can. Unfortunately, the Social Security Administration tends to lose a lot of things. You can definitely bring records in. So when they call you to schedule an appointment, you can schedule it online. You could do your appointment, over the phone, or you could schedule to go into their office. Some parents do like to bring the medical records with them to the appointment, and those will be submitted with the application. And if you have access to that and the records are what they need, that could speed up the application process. So yeah, I don't think it hurts. The more information you provide, the accurate information that is provided, the faster the application process is going to go. But I say that, but I am also saying, just know, I always say, when you start this process, put your patient's hat on, okay? Because it's not fast. It's unfortunate.
And that's part of the reason why you want to go ahead and schedule that appointment a few months early. You want to schedule it for after the day of their birthday, but you have to call early to get on that schedule because they're behind, right?
Yeah, they're very, very busy. So if my child's birthday was today and I called today and said, yes, I want to apply for SSI and I would like to get an appointment, they're probably going to tell me that there are exactly 0 appointments and that they'll call me in 2 weeks to schedule something, and then they'll probably schedule me for March, April, or May. Okay, that's about how that's going to go. Like they're behind, and they're understaffed, and I think there's a budget freeze on hiring more people. It's kind of the perfect storm, but that is what's going on right now. Okay, any additional questions, Michelle?
No, that's it for now. So keep on posting your questions. I'll keep an eye on the chat box, and Allison, I'll let you know when we have, a couple to go over.
Okay, yes, that sounds great. And I love it when you guys post questions, because when you have a question, typically somebody else has that question too. So it's helping everybody out here. So thank you for that. Okay, so the Title II program, again, we've got the Title 16, which is an entitlement program. You don't pay into that. That is SSI. The Title II program is Social Security Disability, Retirement Survivors Disability, Childhood Disability Benefits, CDB, formerly called DAC, that we mentioned. And then, so we have the Disabled Widowers Benefit, DWB. An adult receiving Title II benefits is a beneficiary. So what we're talking about here, this is simply just to tell you that, the Social Security Administration throws around a lot of scary acronyms, and it's really, and a lot of them they seem like they would be, a lot of them are synonymous, and they don't seem like they would be. And some, you think that they're the same, and they're absolutely not. And the biggest misnomer is people's confusion between SSI, supplemental security income, and SSDI, the Social Security Disability or Social Security Retirement. Okay, that's the biggest. So we've got SSA, Social Security Retirement, RSDI, Retirement Survivors Disability Insurance, SSDI, Social Security Disability Insurance, CDB for Childhood Disability Benefits, DWB for Disabled Widower Benefits. And so if you ever wondered why you were confused, it's not you. You're not crazy. It is confusing. So we got this in there for that. Okay. So let's talk about those childhood disability benefits for a moment. So we kind of hit on that it's important to establish that your child's disability started prior to age 22. So what if you are on here and your child is over age 22 and you did not establish that their disability started prior to age 22? So the first thing I want to say is it is totally okay, and you are not too late to the party. It's not a matter of you had to apply and establish that the disability started prior to age 22. You can apply at any time. You simply just want to have proof that the disability did start prior to age 22. So why does this even matter? Who even cares? What is this childhood disability benefit? Okay. So the cool thing is I mentioned to you that the Title II program, Social Security, as workers, we pay into the system. We have quarters, working quarters. If you've ever downloaded your Social Security statement, by the way, unless you're over age 60, they don't mail them to you anymore. You can create your account at ssa.gov. You can put that in the chat box. Michelle, you can create your account at ssa.gov and you can download your Social Security statement to see how many working quarters you have. But basically what this CDB program is it says, if we have a child whose disability started prior to age 22, when me as a parent, if I retire or I become disabled, my child has the right to get 50% of my benefits. So for example, if I retire and my monthly benefit is $4,000 a month, then my child will be entitled to $2,000 a month. Okay, so 50% is the math. Okay, and it's based off of the full retirement age. Okay, so whatever your full retirement age, and your statement will indicate that. Okay, and so basically what happens is you're clipping along, your disabled child is getting SSI, okay, the entitlement program for the indigent and disabled. They're getting $914 per month. And then as a parent, one parent retires or becomes disabled, then what happens is our kids flip over from SSI to basically SSDI or RSDI under a parent's record. So instead of getting $914 a month now, they're going to get 50% of whatever the parent's amount is. And the parent's amount is not reduced, because that is a question that comes up every time. Like, if I do this, my kid gets half, do I get 50% less? And so no, it's a great program for the disabled. This benefit to your child will continue as long as the child remains disabled and as long as the parent remains alive. When the parent passes away, that child's amount is going to jump up to 75% of the parent's amount, okay? So one thing that I want you guys to be aware of, and you can check this out on the Social Security website as well, you need to be aware of family maximums, because a lot of our families, they have one person that may stay at home and provide caregiving services, and the other person may work. And in that example, the spouse is going to draw off of the other spouse's record as well. Okay, so that's one example where the family maximums are going to come in, because we would have the worker's spouse, and then the disabled child, and that's 3 people. And unfortunately, some families have more than one disabled child, right? So we have 2 kids that qualify for childhood disability benefits. So the family maximums are going to come into play there, and it's typically 150 to 188% of the main earner's primary benefit. Okay, Michelle, how are we on questions?
We just have a couple. Do we need to get guardianship before we apply for SSI?
That is such a fabulous question. Thank you for putting that out there. So, guardianship is that age-old question. Do we need guardianship? Do we not need guardianship? And so first things first, we do have webinars on that entire topic. So if you're wondering about the details in the state of Texas on what to do or what not to do, you can check that out on our YouTube channel. So the law says in Texas that when it comes to applying for guardianship, it's the least restrictive, most appropriate, and they use the word WARD, W-A-R-D, which I don't like that word, but anyway, least restrictive, most appropriate for the person, okay, is what the law says we have to do. So in Texas, there is guardianship, full guardianship. It takes all their rights away, their right to vote, their right to marry, their right to drive, okay? Then there is partial guardianship, which they will retain some of their rights, okay? So there is a such thing as partial guardianship. And then the least restrictive is a power of attorney, healthcare power of attorney. And in Texas, we have something called the supported decision-making agreement, okay? Other states have them too, but not all states have a supported decision-making agreement. So to your question, first things first, guardianship is the only thing that the Social Security Administration recognizes. They're a government entity. They do what they want, okay? They only recognize guardianship. They don't recognize powers of attorney, even though it's a legal document and your document is valid. They do not recognize a power of attorney or a healthcare power of attorney or, a supported decision-making agreement. That said, there are many families that child can't manage money. They don't. They may they may be on the borderline. We see a lot of families that are kind of, their child might be borderline. We're hopeful and optimistic that they're going to get there, but at 18, they're just not there yet. And that's okay, because their brains aren't even fully formed until they're 26. It's okay. But there are forms that you can get. So the guardianship is helpful, okay? And you can definitely be the representative payee if you have the guardianship. But just because you don't have the guardianship does not mean that you can't be the representative payee. You can work that out with the Social Security Administration. They're not going to allow you to be a representative payee for someone who does not need a representative payee. So simply being an overbearing mom that wants to be the representative payee, they're not going to allow that, okay? But if the kid, I might be guilty. I might be guilty of being an overbearing mom, I say. But if the kid has capacity, right? If the kid has the capacity to understand and to handle things, then they're not going to approve that representative payee. So also, Michelle, if you would put this in the chat box as well. It's the SSA 1696 form. Everybody can download this right off the internet. This is a form, so if you don't have guardianship, that your 18 plus child can sign, authorizing you to call on their behalf regarding their benefits. If you don't have guardianship, or if you're not the representative payee, or if there is not a 1696 on file, any one of those situations, right, they will not talk to you. And I know it seems maddening. It really is maddening for a lot of people. But just know that you're going to need help with that. And also, clearly, we have some kids that are not intellectually disabled, but they might be nonverbal. So, there are other reasons why you could be a representative payee. What else do we have, Michelle? Additional questions?
So can the child can get benefits from mother or father, but not both, is the answer to the question that was asked. Can the child get benefits from both parents? Whichever one is highest, correct? And then what about step parents, Allison?
So yes, it does apply for step parents as well. It can be step parents. And if grandparents they have adopted, or they have adopted these kids, it could be off of a grandparent's record. But so it's parents or step parents, and it could be off of the higher record, and it could switch. So if mom retires first, then they could be covered for childhood disability benefits under mom's record. And then later, a couple of years later, dad retires and his benefits are much higher. Then you can request to switch to dad's record. And what I want to say is, again, the Social Security Administration, they're very, very busy. This kind of stuff that we're talking to you about doesn't just happen automatically. It's not magically happens and it just does it. You have to request this. You need to be knowledgeable about this, and you have to request this. There are many, many, many people that are not getting the benefits that they should because of this. So attending things like this and kind of learning about what's out there for you, it's really, really important.
And is SSI ever higher than SSDI? I don't think so, right?
It can be. It can be. It can be. It just depends. What they're going to want to see, that if we're going to switch over to a parent's record, for instance, so right now SSI is $914 per month. So a parent's record needs to be at least $1,800 a month, right, to switch over to the RSDI. So in some cases, the individual will still get some SSI and some RSDI under a parent's record if the benefit isn't that high. We see that commonly where people have not been in the U.S. for, like, maybe they haven't worked 20 or 30 years in the U.S. or, some of those things, or maybe they didn't work for a period of years while they were raising kids and then they went to work. So they may have a lower record. So that can happen. You're never going to get both total benefits. So in the example, somebody's record is $4,000 a month and the child's benefit would be $2,000. In that example, the child would switch over to the SSDI under the parent's record. But in the example of the parent's benefit is $1,800, there would be a combination of both SSI and SSDI. Okay, so that's where it starts getting confusing. You don't have to know all that. You guys can, if you guys know how to reach out to us, we can help you with that, because it does start getting pretty convoluted.
Yeah, I mean, and just to add on to what you're saying, you're not required to take SSDI if you prefer to stay on SSI if it's higher, right?
Correct. Correct.
That's all we have for now.
Okay, perfect. All right. So, what are, how do we protect your child's government benefits? And this is where we were talking about, really working with people that are nuanced and special needs. We want to make sure that you have your assets and your child's assets in the appropriate buckets. And so this is where we were talking earlier, and we were talking about the special needs trust, and we were talking about the ABLE account. We don't want them to have more than $2,000 in their name. This is all sources. This is if grandma and grandpa have been buying savings bonds since they were born. Sometimes that happens. It could be mutual funds, any kind of money that they have, they're counting everything, okay? One big thing that we really, really like to talk about, it is really important that you ensure that your loved one's name is not set up as a beneficiary on any life insurance, investment, or bank accounts, okay? This is a common mistake, and anytime we have a webinar, I would say a very large percentage of the people that are attending or on the podcast have made this mistake. So you're not alone, and it's easily fixed, okay? The reason, so let's just say, for example, the child's name is John Smith, okay, a fictitious character here, but we never want to name John Smith. John Smith has a disability. We never want to name him directly as a beneficiary on anything we have, okay? And a lot of times what people do is they say, okay, if something happens to me, my spouse is my beneficiary. And if something happens to me and my spouse is already dead and gone, then that's easy. I'm going to name my children. That's pretty common. And that's what a lot of people do. And if you've done it, it's okay. You can fix it. Okay. The reason we don't want to leave our kids with disabilities as beneficiaries on anything, that's going to put them over the $2,000, right? And so then they're going to lose their eligibility for SSI and Medicaid. And remember, we want to keep them Medicaid eligible always for the waivers that are available in Texas that we're going to talk about in a moment. So if you have done this and you need to change, if you don't know, okay, so put this on your list to check on this, okay? This is stocks, bonds, mutual funds, life insurance, any old pension plans you may have had from old employers or things like that. So check on the beneficiaries on what you have. What is the primary beneficiary? What is the contingent beneficiary? And if it's wrong, all you need to do is request a free change of beneficiary form from the company. They will send it to you, and you can update those beneficiaries accordingly. And so the right way to leave it to our special needs child is the third-party special needs trust, or the supplemental needs trust for the benefit of John Smith, right? Instead of John Smith directly, we're going to leave it to the third-party special needs trust for the benefit of little Johnny, okay? So we also want you to make sure that any well-meaning family members don't leave assets to the named individual as opposed to a third-party special needs trust. Listen, if you have affluent family members, grandma and grandpa, aunts and uncles, that stand to leave any kind of substantial money to your child, you do want to make sure that you already have a third-party special needs trust set up. And you do want to talk to those folks and explain to them that it is important that it's left to the third-party special needs trust for the benefit of the child and not to the child outright. And you can give them specific names of the trust to do that. And you can say, listen, I'm not assuming anything, or I just want you to know we want to maintain the eligibility for benefits in the future. And this is really important. And this is also really important because your parents and your family members' financial advisor, they don't have any background in special needs. I would say like probably less than 1%, right? There's 250,000 financial advisors in the U.S. and less than 150, not 150,000, less than 150 financial advisors are nuanced in special needs. So this tells me that your family members that are all across the country, that their advisor is not nuanced on this. And when your family member comes in and says, I want to name little Johnny beneficiary, he's my grandson and I love him to death and he has special care needs and I want to name him, their advisor is going to say, okay, and they're going to put John Smith as the beneficiary, and that's going to mess you guys up, okay? And so what happens if this happens, okay? So what happens if this happens is you're going to have to contact an attorney and you're going to have a first-party special needs trust, and there is a Medicaid payback on a first-party special needs trust. So a little planning, setting up that third-party special needs trust first, a little communication can avoid this and can avoid a Medicaid payback on a first-party special needs trust. Sometimes they call that first-party special needs trust an oops trust. Oops, somebody left my child money directly to them, and now I have to have this special needs trust with a Medicaid payback. Okay,
so really
how are we?
While
Sure.
you're on it, you were just talking about, and you're going to continue talking about special needs trusts. Can you just quickly explain the difference between first and third party? And then while I see you're taking a drink, so I'll answer this one. Someone is asking, if my disabled son doesn't have a bank account, how does he get SSI deposited into his account? Well, that's kind of the answer is in the question. You have to have an account for them to put the money into. So you have to open one, right, Allison?
Yes, I would just open one. And so if you're going to be his representative payee, I would just open a separate account. If he's going to be his own, then I would have him have an account. And whether it's a savings account or a checking account, they don't care as long as it can receive direct deposit. Okay.
And then the other one was the first versus third party.
Oh, yes. So the first party special needs trust is the child's money. So in the example that there was a settlement, okay, and it was the child's settlement, it's their money, it would have to go to a first party special needs trust. If somebody leaves them money accidentally to their name outright, it's their money. We can't just disinherit it or say, I'm not taking it. It is going to be counted, and it's going to have to go to a first-party special needs trust. A first-party special needs trust does have a Medicaid payback. So when our loved one with a disability passes away, there is a Medicaid payback on a first-party special needs trust. So we want to avoid that if we can. And a third-party special needs trust is like I have life insurance, and the beneficiary is the special needs trust for my child, okay? That money, when we leave money to the special needs trust, we're leaving it the right way to the third party special needs trust, and there is no Medicaid payback on that, okay? Some people have to have a first party and a third party for various reasons, because there might have been a settlement or something along those lines, or because somebody accidentally left their child money outright, okay, because we didn't have those intentional conversations. But a lot of times, a third party trust will suffice. It just depends on your unique situation. Okay, so transition planning, and I know that we're coming around the bend, and if you're planning, we will be done in about 7 or 8 minutes, okay? So transition planning, when do I need a special needs trust and guardianship? So a special needs trust is going to preserve those future benefit eligibility while providing resources for your special needs child. The guardianship process can begin 6 months prior to the child turning 18. And again, we do invite you to check out the YouTube videos on guardianship. We have multiple guardianship webinars with multiple attorneys across the state of Texas, so you can check those out. And as always, just like we talked about in the beginning, we want you to work with a qualified attorney to prepare these documents. We have seen a lot of DIY type things done, or a lot of my neighbor, the real estate agent, the real estate attorney that did my special needs trust, where your documents were wrong and they were not viewed as a bona fide special needs trust in the eyes of the Social Security Administration. So there's places that we do stuff ourselves, and there's places where we really need to hire a professional, and this is the place where you really need to hire a professional that is really nuanced on this, so that way you can avoid that. Because in the end, what happens is you don't end up saving money, you end up spending double on that as well. Okay, so The ABLE account, what you guys need to know about the ABLE account, first and foremost, there's an entire presentation on ABLE accounts out there on YouTube. The ABLE account is for disabled individuals whose disability started prior to age 26. The law has recently, a new law has passed, but it's not going to take effect till 2026. They're moving this age to age 46, from 26 to 46, starting in 2026. So an ABLE account, it can be, you can contribute, anybody can contribute to an ABLE account. It's limited to the annual gift tax exclusion. Right now for 2023, it's $17,000 a year that you can put into an ABLE account. And you can put an additional $13,590 if the individual with the disability is working. And we never, ever want the ABLE account to go over $100,000. And the reason being is if it goes over $100,000, then we lose our Medicaid eligibility and SSI eligibility. So if you Google an ABLE account and how much money you can have in there, they're going to tell you that you could have over $500,000 in there, which is true, as long as you don't want to qualify for SSI and Medicaid. So 100,000 is what you need to know for that. And so oftentimes people say, well, why do I need an ABLE account and a special needs trust? The two places I can have money above and beyond the $2,000. And the reason is that the ABLE account can pay for things without a 1/3 reduction to SSI. SSI is designed to pay for food and shelter. So an ABLE account can pay for food and shelter without a 1/3 reduction to SSI. A special needs trust can pay for food and shelter as well, but there is a 1/3 reduction for SSI. So the key thing on the ABLE account is under the tax code 529A. We've heard of 529C for college. This is under 529A, and it's for achieving a better life for an individual with a disability. So it's tax-free growth on investments, and you can change those investments twice a year. And as long as we're spending money out of the ABLE account for the benefit of the individual with the disability, and that expense could be construed as achieving a better life for an individual with a disability, you can pay for it out of an ABLE account without taxes and without penalties. So it's a favorable account for folks. Okay, so this is just a quick list that the ABLE account can pay for. We're talking about housing and rent, mortgage payments, food and shelter. An ABLE account can pay for without a 1/3 reduction to SSI. We're talking about any assistive technology, legal expenses, personal support services, transportation, financial management, all of those things it can pay for. And here is a long, exhaustive list of the things that a special needs trust can pay for. And again, you know, when we're thinking about can it be construed as achieving a better life for an individual with a disability, then it can be paid for out of a special needs trust. But if we pay for monthly debt service on food and shelter, there is a 1/3 reduction for SSI. So we've got that list here of what we can't pay for out of a special needs trust without the 1/3 reduction to SSI. And again, it's just basically food and shelter is what we're looking at. So when we're thinking about who's going to care for our children when we're gone, you know, we can help you develop a future care plan. It's going to answer a lot of those questions. And those future care plans are going to be those future care cost estimates. How much is it going to cost when I'm gone? We always suggest considering touring care facilities, transition programs. There's a lot of options out there. We have residential panel 1 and 2 and several different housing topics on our YouTube channel. So if you're wondering about creating your own shared housing, if you're wondering about group homes or other cool programs across the state, that's all out there on the Consolidated Planning Group YouTube channel. We want you to plan early because the waiting lists for these facilities are quite lengthy, and so we want you to have options when you need them. And another thing that we always want to mention is that we want you to make careful considerations before naming a sibling as a future caregiver. Your other kids have hopes and dreams, and those might be dashed a little if they were the full-time caregiver of a sibling. So we want the sibling to be in a loving, friendly relationship with their sibling and not an obligatory relationship that causes resentment. So and when we see this, I mean, we do have siblings where there's a 20-year age difference and it's really appropriate. But for the most part, it's not, and we want to avoid that. And we see it happen more when planning didn't happen. So we're coming kind of to the end of our time here. One of the things that we've talked about briefly was our Medicaid waivers. We have an entire presentation on Medicaid waivers for the state of Texas. If you're joining us from out of state, there are Medicaid waivers in every state in the U.S. But you are going to want to know who your local intellectual disability authority is. And this link here, you can put your zip code in, and it's going to tell you who your local authority is. That is how you're going to get on the waiting list for HCS, Texas Home Living, and Community First Choice. There is an 800 number here for the MDCP, class, and DBMD. And then there's also an 800 number here for the Star Plus waiver. So if you don't know if your child's on the waivers interest list, you might want to pay attention to this when you get this in your email, and go ahead and double check that. We've got kind of a highlight of all of the waivers that are out there. So we've listed them out for you. We've got class, DBMD, HCS, CHFC. Then we also have the MDCP, HCBS, Texas Home Living, and the YES waiver. And there's going to be, you're going to be able to see the explanation of every one of these waivers, so you can learn a little bit more about those waivers. And again, feel free to check out that YouTube on that as well. There are a lot of educational options out there for our kids with disabilities, and we want you to just be aware and plan for these programs. These programs are great, and there's even programs for kids that have intellectual disabilities, IQs below 70. There's a lot of stuff out there. So plan early, look at these programs, find when does the registration open, how long is the program, do they meet in person, or do they meet online, and plan early for those types of things. So we've talked about a lot of stuff today. We are at the end of our time. Summary of the topics that we have discussed here: future care cost estimate, waivers, SSI, SSDI, developing a comprehensive special needs care plan, special needs trust, guardianship, post-high school options, waiting lists, and things like that. I know it's a lot. And so we end this and you're like, oh my gosh, that's a lot. And sometimes you walk away and you're like, oh my gosh, what am I not doing? Where do I even start? Don't feel overwhelmed. That's why we put this information out there. You've totally got this. We're going to provide as many tools and resources as we can for you to be successful on your journey. Again, the slides today will have a list of our upcoming webinars, and you can register for future webinars and attend as many as you want. We always like to take a moment to introduce you to other members of our team. We work on a collaborative team here of awesome people, so I always just like to share that. And as always, you can schedule a meeting, an individual meeting with us. A lot of times in formats like this, people have questions, or maybe they don't want to air everything in a public setting. We always offer free personalized consultations. So when you get the slides today, it has this QR, and you can just hover over that, your phone. It'll take you to our calendar, and you can schedule a free personalized consultation with us. So again, if you are attending by podcast, you can email us at contact@cpgcares.net for a copy of today's slides, and you can reach out to our office directly at 281-690-1177. We are out of time. Do we have any additional questions or anything else that you want us to add, Sharon?
Thank you so much for today's topic and Connor. I believe our parents, they really, benefit a lot from your speech. So thank you so much. And I will ask our parents to register. Remember to register for the next webinar. Okay, so thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you. Everyone have a great afternoon. Thanks for taking your hour with us today. We'll be back with you again soon.
Thank you. Thank you so much.